And thank you to the Digital Transformation Summit for putting together a very interesting panel on a very topical subject. It's very special to me because, like you said, I've been a strong advocate of accelerating digital adoption in Africa for a very long time now. And like you also said, Anisha, it's a force test of things that we had thought about but not yet tried, brought to our lives by COVID. Because the African Union Digital Transformation Strategy had provided a plan for the increasing role and regulation of digital technologies in the African economy for a continent-wide economic integration into the digital economy. And it was going to be based on increased access to network solutions, the digital single market, capacity building through digital skills and e-skilling, secure digital payments, etc., and then a regulatory framework to provide an overarching enabling environment for stakeholders at all levels into the last mile. All of this was due by 2030, and it probably still is. But what COVID has done is that it has put this into an accelerated adoption mode, where businesses, consumers, governments were thrown into a more rapid provision and adoption of digital solutions to simple everyday activities like the provision of essential goods and services as a result. And it hit Africa at a time when it was going through its worst recession. In fact, it plunged it into its worst recession in 25 years. So to give credit to African government and to businesses in particular, they pulled all the stops. They provided innovative digital solutions to all of these essential goods and services delivery solutions, including, say, robotics for essential healthcare services. I know Kenya and Rwanda did some really good work on it. Accelerating the pace of digital solutions for the school year. I know South Africa helped a lot of African countries through the COVID period with those. And then going back to the basics for simpler SMS-based solutions to connect businesses and consumers in low bandwidth areas with e-payment solutions and the development of low bandwidth e-commerce platforms for small businesses and local providers. And the private sector did all of this while continuing to manage consumer and employee experiences, handholding each of these stakeholders through the adoption of the challenges that the period posed. So that's what for me makes this panel so interesting, because we have, like you said, 5 industry leaders who have worked, or today now 4 industry leaders, who have been working from the front in optimizing digitalization to convert what was a crisis into an opportunity. And I'm so excited to hear their points of view on this subject. So if it's okay, I'm just going to jump straight into asking my first question, which is the most obvious. What do you see as the dynamic between digitalization and the African ecosystem in general and the economy in particular? Where are we now and where do we need to go from here? Ronald, do you want to take this one?
Pallavi, thank you. Thank you for having us. It's quite a pleasure to be here this morning. Or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world, to have this very, I think, important conversation. You know, like Pallavi has said rightfully, I think the digital transformation agenda on the continent had already started picking up steam. The evidence of this, of course, is from the all these digital platforms that we have been seeing coming out of some of the digital markets like Nigeria, Kenya, you know, South Africa, Egypt. A second evidence is all the direct investments that are coming onto the continent from across the world. As of last year, you know, the disclosed deals were up to about $2 billion. And these are only the disclosed deals. Obviously, there's a lot more investments that is coming onto the continent. And then there's thousands upon thousands of new innovations that haven't gotten traction yet, haven't scaled, so are completely out of the radar. So I think the agenda is there. African continent governments have also been putting a focus on digital transformation. So you have the initiative being driven by President Kagame of Rwanda and President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, called Smart Africa, that today has an executive board of about, I think, 34 or 35 presidents. And so this just shows of the 54 countries on the continent, you know, 34 are leading the digital transformation agenda from the very top level of government. So I think these are good signs of the things that are happening on the continent. But obviously COVID came and shook up the space. COVID came and brought in new dynamics. Obviously, it came with its own challenges, but we know that the best innovations actually come out of such challenges, right? And so there's massive opportunity for growth. Statistics coming out of last year already show that, there's already a 14%, up to a 14% increase in online shopping. People's habits have been shifting in terms of how they shop. So this is an opportunity as well. If you look out into the future, and I'm sure we'll talk about the future, if you look out into the future of how we go, e-commerce at a global scale or at a continent-wide scale. We've seen shifts in education. For example, here in Kenya now, you have a platform that was built called Mluga that is now trying to deliver digital content to children in far out rural areas in their local language, which has also been a bit of a challenge. Whether it is in healthcare, and I think Pallavi mentioned this as well, we're already seeing serious shifts in how access to healthcare has started reshaping on the continent. So whether it is delivery of drugs and vaccines using drones in Kenya and Rwanda, robotics, I think in Nigeria and Rwanda, there's this huge shifts that are already beginning to happen. Transport is also not being left behind. Again, statistics out of last year is showing that there's been a 17% increase in e-hailing solutions. So, the public transport sector on the continent, which is largely very informal, is being disrupted, and therefore they need a new thinking around this. So I think on the scale of it, and I know I don't have too much time, on the scale of it, there needs to be a significant shift on how African governments go digital by design. And it's no longer just a conversation about, this is what the future holds. The future is here. When I hear people talk about, what's the outlook for post-COVID? I'm like, what post-COVID are we talking about? When the first case landed on the continent, we were already in post-COVID. The ground shifted significantly. And so, and Pallavi, you asked me about the ecosystem. I think there needs to be a shift in terms of how the ecosystem sees the opportunities. So there needs to be more cross-pollination and collaboration across the continent so that we do not have too many little, digital solutions being built, but we have collaborative effort that comes up with global scale sort of applications, things that will traverse the continent and, go into global scale use. The African Continental Free Trade Area obviously is now also a new opportunity for the continent. I think, innovators need to start thinking broadly. Your market, for example, if you're talking about Kenya or Ethiopia, which only has about 100 million, has now, from January 1st of this year, become 1.2 billion. So I think in terms of the opportunity for scale, the market now has just fundamentally shifted. So we have two big things happening. We have to think, how do we re-engineer post-COVID, but also we now have a larger single market to address. Those are my initial thoughts, Pallavi. I hope I answered your question.
No, that was candid and insightful. Thank you so much. And it leads me directly to the next point I had, which was, like you said, the best innovation comes in the face of challenge. And because the adoption of digital technologies always comes with its own challenges, its change management requirements, COVID obviously put all of that in high speed. And so I'm going to ask everyone now this question. What has been your experience in your respective sectors dealing with these challenges, managing consumer expectations and employee experiences? What has been your version of, as Ronald was saying, digital by design? And Brite, maybe you want to take that one first.
Yes, that'll be a pleasure. Thanks. So, obviously, I'm from a mobile operator. The day we got sent into lockdown, we had two challenges. One was to figure out how we're actually going to work, because most of us are office bound. We not let's say we didn't adopt digital as fast as we should have. And secondly, we are underlay to the economy. We're essential service as telco providers. So we needed to see how we can build or continue building and maintaining the network while all of this is happening. I mean, in the first month of lockdown, our traffic, the mobile traffic increased by 50%. So, I mean, our network was almost falling apart. We had to look at very innovative ways to deal with the load that, that COVID actually caused. I mean, it was good from an operator perspective because obviously more traffic is more revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, we don't want the whole network to collapse and fall apart. And that was, one of the big challenges. And I must say, early adoption of digital transformation did save us a little bit, in the sense that we started, let's say, virtualizing our packet core, and all our, switching and transport systems a few years ago. So to increase capacity made it a bit easier because it wasn't a legacy box that was purpose built that was put down. So that did help us, but we had to look at innovative ways to do the rest of the business. Previously, when we built a new site, we would have a site inspection team heading out. Now we actually have the installation engineer there with a GoPro, and then we have the team sitting at home watching it. I mean, it made their life so much easier. And, as Ronald said, there's no post-COVID. I don't see us going back to someone driving to sites again. I mean, we've made it a lot easier for ourselves now by adopting things a bit faster than we should have. And, it's really helped us. I mean, we are a Microsoft house in the sense, that's what we use for our internal comms and email and stuff. So everyone in the office had access to Teams, but it wasn't widely utilized. Now, all of a sudden, everyone is stuck at home. We've adopted Teams, in a heartbeat. I mean, there's that joke that goes around, like, what drove digital transformation in your organization? Is it the CTO, the CIO? No, it's COVID. I mean, that really accelerated it. I mean, it allowed us all to, and adoption was good. Obviously, as an operator, we had to think of innovative solutions because it wasn't just about Telkom, it was about the industry. So we had to look at how we prioritize, let's say, corporate communication traffic, such as Teams and Zoom, all these channels that we knew are important for the economy versus things that are still critical, but not as, like, such as Netflix as an example, it's more of entertainment. So there were all these packages and bundles that had to be structured for enterprises to be able to take their organizations to the next level. So it wasn't just about helping ourselves or see how we grow. It was about now, how does the industry grow? And I think Ronald put it very well to say, it's not, you're not in this alone, right? I mean, you drive the whole ecosystem. And, being part of it means if you fail, you sort of fail on, on behalf of other people also, which we ideally don't want to. So, I mean, it was an interesting time, but I think we've adopted, and we'll have to see how we keep on with that. Obviously, there's challenges that have come with it, but I think we'll probably deal with that, I think, later in the discussion.
Thank you, Brite. Andrew, how has Zoho Corp dealt with this time? I'm assuming your experiences are very similar as well.
Yes, definitely. And exactly kind of what Brite said. Zoho as a company, we've got more than 8,000 employees worldwide. So it was, in the beginning, we put together a team which was tasked to do this business continuity and make sure that we could get through this new environment that presented itself. And we were very lucky in the sense that Zoho uses its own technology. We've got more than 45 apps. So we were able to communicate, set up team chats on our communication application. And we really pulled together. And then we had to move, after 10 days, more than 8,000 employees to work from home. And that then, we had all the technology in place, but then the data signal and infrastructure within the different regions also took a bit of strain. Like Brite was saying, as soon as the demand went up, the systems, the infrastructure, it took a bit of a strain. So that was kind of the one challenge that we had with getting staff to work from home, was the speed of the internet and the coverage. But in all, it worked really well for us, that we were already kind of set up for it. And then in the last 12 months, I've been consulting with businesses and helping them implement, the technology. And the main things that they were struggling with was communication. where they didn't necessarily they had telephones in the office, but they didn't have staff, couldn't access the telephones on their computers. And so they had to implement telephony into their technology solutions that they were using. And then also a lot of them they didn't have cloud built technology that they were using. So a lot of them had to try and log into their computers at the office through a remote desktop protocol. And it was a very just disconnected tech system that they were operating on. So yes, this pandemic definitely did a huge kind of drive to digital transformation, especially cloud, technology. So yeah, that was my experience with that big change.
Thanks, Andrew. That's actually very, very interesting as well. And I wish we had more time to actually go into the depth of these experiences because they have so much to offer. But what I am going to do is bring in Hartnell at this point with his experience from the banking sector. Hartnell, what do you have to say?
Well, I think we have similar kind of challenges with regards to transformation. Number one, it was a disruption not only for the businesses, but also for the people. We had to shift our working methodologies, focusing less on inputs and processing and more on output. Looking at the frontline business within banking, I think we have within the corporate space and also within the SME space, the relationship management kind of setup whereby people used to walk to clients. And now with social distancing, there was no more going to clients and explain to them about products. It's all about having Zoom calls. So sales was actually very impacted, and we had to innovate new ways of actually helping the frontline teams to continue serving their mandate. And simple things like creating now propensity models, propensity to purchase, propensity to buy, were actually now being used. As much as people are learning how to use Teams and other social or conferencing tools, they also had now to rely on data, trying to see who do I talk to. I have a list of 10 customers. Who do I feel has a higher propensity to purchase a product? We also had to disrupt our way of product design and governance. Speaking about product design, people are now shifting to the channels. It's not longer about having your brick and mortar and your existing product types that are sold off the branches. It's more about coming up with very innovative, simple to use and simple to understand products. We had to launch, I think, a key product within the banking space, which allowed customers to use more of their channels. There's obviously the competition from the fintech side and the telco side, whereby where you are having players in the financial services, we had to increase our limits. Our ATM limits had to go up because we didn't want you to come to the branch. We want you to access your money from anywhere. We had now to push more of card purchases and card sales. But I think technically, we also felt some of the similar kind of challenges whereby bandwidth problems appeared. Immediately, people shifted working from home. Your VPN was not working well. We had to deploy multiple VPNs for people. You're speaking about people asking for training about Teams within the early times of March and April. But I think now everything has settled. I think people are adapting. We are looking at a hybrid model where some people can work from home or have one day come into the office. But I think this is here to stay. I think as Ronald said, post-COVID happened immediately. The first case was announced and people had to quickly think on their feet. I think the banking space, we are able to do that. So challenge-wise, I think it's more about a push to becoming better. I think just riding the wave, we are able to transform and be able to take opportunity of the new kind of tech that is coming out within this era.
Thanks, Hartnell. Thank you so much. And I heard you touch briefly on your experience with using data to improve your services. And I'm curious to hear more about that on both how you're using data to improve services and provide services in various sectors, but also what you think should be the shape of data regulation specific to the African continent going forward, which would address legitimate consumer concerns and business concerns of privacy and data security, but also not restrict innovation and allow businesses to do what they do. So why don't I ask you to just continue a little bit more and give us a little bit more insight on the data side of things?
Sure. So I think I'll start off with the first question about how we can use data in the offensive way. And when I speak about offensive use of data, it's actually proactively being able to create value of data. Now, for our bank, I was driving the transformation of the bank with regards to data maturity. After hitting some of the key milestones with regards to literacy, understanding what is important, it was more of a push methodology whereby I was going to business and telling them why you need to have data owners and stewards, why you need to think about importance of data, why you are supposed to move away from reports into insights. But I can tell you, after March struck, I started having more than 50 requests on the help desk, on the CDO help desk, because people now are shifting from the push methodology more into a pull. People want more insights. Now you've been told you can't walk to the client. You're seeing your targets are not being met. I think people now started seeing and getting the interest to use data more. Now, what that called for within my team, number one, we had to change our approach. Instead of prioritizing what was supposed to be done with regards to the existing book of work program schedule, we had to now go to more of ad hoc support and self-service analytics. So the shift to not only empowering and creation of tools, and now more of pushing new kinds of technologies that empower the business users to use data more. Self-service, data federation became something that was really important to me. I saw an increase in the number of insights created and self-service tools used within the network by more than 100%. People who never talked about using data and were always relying on their expertise in sales, marketing, product design, markets, and treasury kind of conversations now wanted more insight. So we actually had to reshape our way of delivering value to business. We said also tracking value, and people started seeing that actually data gave them insight that were not present, considering that the business and the customer had shifted. Number two, with regards to data, we also had to be innovative. We had set targets at the start of the year, and these targets were actually at risk come end of Q1, given that COVID had struck. And we actually said now looking at what are these new ways of still meeting our existing targets using data. And the first easy thing was shifting more into data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So that is actually an area that I actually had to ramp up skills and capacity very quickly. I had a couple of data science, a handful, and I had to train all the other developers and analysts how to actually understand how to fit simple machine learning algorithms on R and Stata. And I think the enterprise also, and the bank and the group as well, also rode on this wave, considering now we are actually transforming our whole enterprise on data, changing our distributed computing strategy, changing our cloud strategy. And it happened so fast in less than 3 months. Now I'm having people within the team who can actually write for you predictive algorithms, tell you which card is going to sell more, tell you which customers you should stop talking to and focus who are going to give you more value from cross-sell and upsell. And maybe another point I can mention before I shift to governance about data is model analytics. I think this is the only time that all models, from the marketing models, treasury models, actually failed us. You're talking about prediction of oil prices going to a down low of 0. I think nobody has seen that. But if you actually work back in time, if we had implemented GACH models, if we implemented time series concepts, we actually were able to predict that oil was going to take a dip. But this now has taught machine learning analysts and AI engineers that let's now create models that can also predict shocks. I think it was an overhaul for us, being a regulated bank, that we have to report our impairment and profits. We had to actually start looking at more scientific ways of fitting our models. Shifting to governance, I think the government and the regulators are catching up, not really playing catch up this time. We have POPIA in South Africa. We have GDPR, which is now fully being embedded within Africa. We have more than 35 African countries that have now data protection and privacy regulations. I think we're not being left behind as banks. I'm leading some steering committees within the bank, speaking of how people are supposed to be trained about data subject rights, knowing how to implement this. And we're also waiting for the regulators to give us more guidance, but we're not sitting and waiting. I believe this is something that still needs to be ramped up. Now that everyone is shifting to go into digital technologies and new kind of tech that sits outside there in the Internet of Things, then we have to actually ensure that the data subjects are protected and have the right kind of confidence to interface and interact with our solutions.
That's very interesting. Again, I'm going to say what I said earlier. I wish we had more time to go into that in more detail, because that would make a great case study. Andrew, I'm going to bring you in here now with Zoho. What has been your experience using data through the pandemic?
Well, yeah, definitely the security and privacy have been a big topic, very hot topic. And you know, Zoho, our history, we've been focusing on security and having, encryption, and we do also threat modeling, and we've got hackathons where even staff try and hack our systems. So it's been something that we've always been focusing on. And with this POPI Act in South Africa and with GDPR, we've obviously had to also get compliant so that all our customers that use our technology are compliant and can actually secure their customers' data that they put into our systems. So things like having a really good security policy. If companies out there are going to implement technology, make sure you've got good technology that has a really good security policy in place. Also be mindful if you're going to try and use free technology, that security might be questionable. And then also the regulators in the country. I think it's going to be important for governments to really regulate this data privacy and data breaches, and to have proper consequences so that that can be policed properly. Because I think it's going to be a really big thing for companies going forward.
That I agree with 100%. We've had some very, very insightful experiences and recommendations through the last few discussions. And clearly the future of digital transformation in Africa is in very safe hands. So I'm going to ask my roundup question now, because I know that at some point we will have to stop, unfortunately. What next from here? What do you think will be the most innovative possibilities to look forward to? And how do you think the digital landscape in the continent is going to evolve now in the backdrop of what is already a post-COVID world and with the new pace of adoption of digital technologies? Brite, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, look, I'll start with the telco sector. A few years ago, there was a paper published by Deloitte where they said it was just talking about various options that telecom companies had in the future. And, it started off with one called the Engineer Strikes Back, which now all engineers are like, no matter what that means, we're going for that option because it sounds cool, right up to the virtual telco. And it was just about the level of, how much interaction or how much work the telco does versus like OTTs or, hyperscalers and things like that. But with the COVID and the acceleration of digital transformation, I mean, we've seen like Microsoft has bought Affirmed, which is a packet core company. Now they're going to start offering packet cores, on Azure. It will be very difficult for us now as a telco operator to look at like Cisco or Huawei or ZTE when this is now on the table, because it could provide a much easier option. So as a telco provider, we need to reassess, because we may end up being, or let's say a larger chunk of a telco operator may be a lot more virtual than we expected. I mean, there's obviously, like let's say a last mile access getting into the house, or having an antenna, on a base station, which can't really be virtualized. But I mean, there's a large portion of the software that can move into the cloud. And I think there's so much maturity, in the hyperscalers and in that industry now because of the acceleration in cloud. I mean, they were working on it before COVID. I think just pushed them a little bit more. But now we really have to relook at our strategy and our direction, and we have to decide what actually is the most optimum for us. And I mean, not only does that impact, let's say, the telco sector, because now we look at, let's say, there's more competition in terms of equipment suppliers, but the equipment suppliers themselves, the traditionals, Nokias and Ciscos, I mean, can they function the same if they're going to take on Microsoft and Rakuten and, AWS? I don't think so. They're going to have to also, adapt. And, just to a point that I wanted to mention earlier, even though we had that significant increase in data traffic, 50%, on lockdown, the month of lockdown, voice stayed consistent. So it showed that, people have adapted, and they actually are adopting digital transformation. They really want to use the capabilities of what's out there. I mean, it's not that voice, because we would have expected the legacy services to increases like voice, because now you're working from home, you need to phone people more, but it wasn't the case. It was flat. So it just shows how actually society is ready and they are adopting it. I think the enablers, us that are the enablers, we need to do our work to basically provide more opportunities and services for them, just for them to take it up. Thanks.
Thank you. That makes total sense. You're right. We're already in a significantly more digital world now. And with that, I'm going to pivot back to Ronald. because we started with him, and I feel like it's only nice to have him give his thoughts at this point as well. Ronald?
Thank you very much, Pallavi, and for the industry players, the guys who are under pressure to deliver services even in this disruptive period. And I think roundly what I have had is, at the end of the day, it's all going to be about how we pivot on data. Like I had already spoken earlier, I think the market is no longer single country markets, but it's now continent wide. So we need to start thinking big. And if data is going to be at the core of what we do, providing insights into the solutions that we build, then data governance is going to be extremely critical and fundamental. I think I'd already mentioned, we all now need to start thinking, putting in a digital by design in everything that we do, whether it is in private sector or in the public space. We need to begin to think about shared platforms, so more things become interoperable, setting up the infrastructure to enable that. A lot of that is already happening across the continent, but it's just, what is the scale of acceleration that we're looking forward to now? I think data is the new oil on the continent, particularly when you're looking at 1.2 billion people. That is multiple times over number of data points. This data needs to be open, so it needs to be available and transparent to the public, to innovators, to businesses. It has to be user driven. So again, how do we pivot user design, right? So human-centered designing for digital solutions across the continent. And finally, I think there needs to be a mind shift, to the extent that I think we also now have an opportunity to use the digital transformation to create opportunities for more Africans. I can't remember, I think it was in the previous panel that Michael mentioned the level of poverty and how we've not been able yet to use this digital transformation drive to address this. The possibilities I see, and this is a challenge for people like Hartnell, actually for all of these people on the call, Brite and Andrew as well, with a move towards the continental free trade area, which now becomes, just by numbers, the largest continental free trade area in the world, right? Just by sheer numbers. I think we need to start thinking ahead in how do we then make it truly one market. And the opportunity, I think, is in building a continent-wide digital marketplace. But once we move in that direction, and this is for Hartnell and the banks, how then do we have an African digital currency? We've been talking about an African currency for the last, I think, 20, 30 years. But now I think it has been overtaken by events. We need to start thinking digital. And, I think it is a possibility. I think it will happen sooner rather than later, particularly if the free trade area is to become a reality. Thanks.
Thank you, Ronald. And I mean, again, what you said is sort of what Hartnell and everyone else were also echoing earlier, is on the offensive use of data, and therefore having an overarching framework for data governance, which is going to be so important going forward. And if I could leave this discussion with one last thought, it would probably be, maybe the organizers want to talk about having a summit on just data and data governance and the use of data going forward, because that really does require a whole day of conversation in itself. But thank you so much, everyone. This is really nice. I was hoping to get more closing thoughts in, but I am getting a message saying that we need to wrap up now and open for questions. So we can open for questions now. And depending on how many questions we have, we'll see if we have time to add in more closing thoughts from the other speakers. But thank you, everyone. This has been extremely insightful.